Hi, everybody. I'm Bob Bowman, Editor-in-Chief of Supply Chain Brain, and I want to welcome you to this presentation on Manufacturing Outlook, the dash for profitability, growth, and scale, presented by Clio. One quick reminder, there will be an audience question and answer session at the end of this presentation. Audience members are encouraged to submit their questions at any time during the presentation by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Now, manufacturers' operational goals can be summed up into three words: profitability, growth, and scale. And these expectations only become more intense as the business moves along the maturity curve, with mounting pressure to make smart investment choices that lead to the right type of gains and mitigate risk. A lot of times, though, integration is the growth lever that people aren't thinking enough about. Your business must be able to connect to trading partners in a digital, automated, and consistent manner to maintain control over critical transactions such as purchase orders and invoices. But it's not just a question of classic B2B. You need to feed certain applications the right data and real-time insights to drive smarter decision-making. And that's the topic of our presentation today. With that, I'd like to introduce our speaker for today, Frank Kenny. He is Director, Industry Solutions with Clio. Frank is a self-described failed musician who turned to technology, became a former Gartner analyst, and is currently a market evangelist and strategy director. Frank is widely credited as creator of the term Managed File Transfer, or MFT, and was the first to write about and discuss its modern architecture, platform, and use cases. Previously, Frank also held leadership roles in product marketing, aligning vision and strategy with integration products, services, and messaging. As an independent IT consultant, he helped technology providers create, validate, and implement a variety of business strategies. With that, I'd like to introduce and turn over the presentation to Frank Kenny. Frank,
Thank you. Thank you,
take it
Bob.
away.
Thank you. Wow. Sometimes every once in a while, when you hear what you've done, you just go, wow, I didn't realize all of that, but that's great. Thank you for having me back at Supply Chain Brain. Really appreciate the opportunity that you guys continue to give us as we talk to the market. So today we're going to talk about how to get us back onto a predictable path. Supply chain disruption, the predictability is not. Let's see how we can jump back into what we need to be doing to change our business. And we'll talk about how these companies, the best companies in the world, are constantly evolving. And we'll talk about why they're evolving and how they're evolving and what's driving that. How architecture and strategy start to change with growth. The strategy, the architecture that you start with will not be the architecture and strategy that you're going to end with and that you're going to use to move through different phases of your growth. And then finally, how can you use some of these things to predict where you're going to be? And if you can do that, if you can take advantage of knowing where you need to be and when you can get there, then you can start to plan your strategy, plan your people, plan your processes around it. So again, thank you for joining us here. Let's get into it. So one of the things that I just like to do to set the stage, right, is what I'm seeing out in the market, what I'm seeing through Clio, the engagements that we have across the board, what people are searching for, right, and searching for on our site and searching on throughout the internet is still around EDI education and supply chain management and KPIs and all of those good things. And at any given point, we see engagements where people are just talking about how can I take my core integrations and centralize them. ERP and TMS migrations, which drive these B2B kind of decisions, etc. And we are seeing a plethora of applications that need to be connected to, that need to be integrated with. So this is what folks are searching on. This is what they're asking ourselves and a whole bunch of other providers in the industry about. And this is the kind of thing that we're seeing in their environments. And so a couple of things start to bubble up, and we're validating a lot of some of the trends that we're starting to see. Every presentation, if you follow me and you attend, whether they are presentations at industry events, presentations at our Clio events, or presentations and webinars like Supply Chain Brain, I always pull up this pendulum, this idea that shippers have powers, and then the transportation, the logistics guys have powers, and it goes back and forth. And that's the one dependable, predictable thing that you can get out of supply chain. And right now, we are probably still leaning somewhat to the shipper side, but it is really starting to get to some equilibrium. Now, as many of you know, if you've been doing this for any amount of time, it's not really quite equilibrium. It'll go back to the other side the way that it was at the end of 20 and 21, and then it'll start to edge back like it did in 22 and then go into shippers. So we that knob just switches back and forth. And right now, as of this month, September of 2024, this is where we are currently seeing that pendulum swing. And so what that means is when we start to look at different indicators like the Census Bureau of Economic Activity, we're seeing quarterly profits start to rise. We are seeing both from the retailers and the manufacturers, and they kind of go hand in hand. We're also seeing inventories, reasonably stay flat. Some of the changes in inventories, that some of the things that you might start to see is are the pre-holiday things that are happening. Certainly today, as someone that's in Tampa, Florida, dealing with some of the hurricanes and some of the weather that is happening. So we're seeing some stock up, not the run up to the holiday. That is something that we'll see here in a few more weeks, in another month or so. But we're seeing inventories become very, very predictable, right? And then of course we're seeing new orders starting to go up, and again, that is reflective of what's happening in what we traditionally start to see this time of the year as we start to again ramp up to the 2024 holiday season. One of the things that's really interesting when we look on the fulfillment side, because when you make things and you sell things, one of the things that we sometimes don't talk about, we talk about how orders come in and how we do those things, but we don't spend a lot of time on the fulfillment angle of it, right? But this is kind of the symbiotic relationship that exists between both markets. We are still seeing the spot market somewhat soft, right? And we're still starting to see, while the acceptance of loads, right, which is an indicator, the less likely you are to accept a load, right, the better the logistics model is. That's why when you look at 2021, we had a 30% rejection rate, which is a nice way of saying every fourth load that you had, you probably couldn't find a truck the first time around, and so you had to shop around. We are still at a very, very, very high level of acceptance, which means that there's still a lot of capacity out there. And one of the reasons why there's still a lot of capacity out there, we still have a lot of companies that are still working. Now, we saw a lot of companies get out of the market, right? Sometimes it's a small family that may just be parking the trucks and letting the lease go, or finishing out the lease, returning equipment. A lot of mergers, a lot of acquisitions, but we're also seeing a lot of people just simply go out of business. So we're at a point right now where this capacity, this is the last piece of when we talk about recovery in the freight space. This is the last piece that we still need to see some capacity come out of market. When we see that capacity come out of market, then we see more of a demand and less of a supply for manufacturers, and then you start to see more of an equilibrium in the space. So it's important to understand where we are to be able to understand what's happening in the market, and that helps us become predictive. And again, I believe that this is the last piece of it all. Now, that's important because when we start to move into how do we map uh, uh, maturity, and how do we map how a company handles their strategy, handles their architecture, handles how they do business. And what we've done is we've built a model. And we've built a model of a life cycle of a company. They come into a market. So there's this decision, I am going to start to sell something into a market, or I'm going to start to offer this type of a service in the market. And this is consistent whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're a retailer, or you're a logistics provider, where you're offering life sciences or you're offering anything. You make the decision, I am going to play in this market. And once you got your bearing and you understand the terminology, you understand all of those things that are critically important to you having any success in a market, you start to say, okay, I'm in this market now, but how am I different? I'm playing in this market, but I need to show differentiation. That's that next stage that you get to. And it is very much different from just getting your bearings. And we'll talk about that in a moment. You move into growth phase where you're saying, I'm in this market. They know who I am. I'm different than my competitors in this market. And I'm now going to use that differentiation to really push growth, to really push how can I do more? How can I start to build my business? And this is about the time when you're building a nice business. You got great customer acquisition. Someone from upstairs is taking note, right? Sometimes in the investment community, and they come and they pay you a visit, and they say, hey, Frank Henry, we see that you're doing good with this company. We see that you've got a lot of growth. You've got great customer acquisition. You're making good money, but unfortunately, we now need to start to line up your expenses, your profitability. We need to start to concentrate on things like EBITDA. We need to start to concentrate on the things that we can articulate value to the world. Now, you're playing in a market, you're showing differentiation, why people should come to you, and they're coming to you, but now you turn inward and you start to say, I need to start to control my profitability. I need to start to control my expenses. And when you get that, then you can start to scale. You can start to centralize. You can start to do acquisition. There's a bunch of different things that you have the opportunity to do. So how does this manifest itself specifically to supply chain companies? Well, when you're in supply chain, the first thing that you say is, how do I conduct business? How am I getting orders? How am I getting loads? And how am I fulfilling them, right? And how can I attract and maintain the people resources that I need? In many cases, you may have people on a phone and you may be entering some things onto a spreadsheet or some type of low-end ERP or whatever the case is. But then you start to say, well, wait, I need to be different. And in some cases, needing to be different may mean making technology choices to do things faster, to do things more consistently, to do things in a predictable fashion. And then I start to get more customers. I need to connect to anybody regardless of how they want to connect. And then finally, you get to resource management. You know what? I'm doing too many things. I need to focus on the core competencies that are making me money. I'm going to start to outsource other things. And then you get into, I'm going to get into expanding my ecosystem of partners. I'm going to get into acquisitions. I may get into new lines of business. I may have new products. If I'm in logistics, I may move to an LTL model, a brokerage model. I may start to move to different parts of the country. I'm in the Southeast and I'm selling this product, hot sauce, and it's going really well. I'm going to move into the Northwest region. I'm going to open up a factory there, etc. And so these are all of the different things. And if you find yourself starting to ask questions of your technology provider, if you start to find yourself asking questions of your organization that fit into one of these baskets, that's a great way to predict where you are on this evolutionary growth. And all of these things, funny enough, start to have technology and integration patterns associated with them. And so we certainly see them. We see when companies start to talk about Shopify integration or Magento integration, I should say Adobe integration, or other marketplaces, or they start to talk about, how can I do better order capture? Well, we see a lot of those types of questions and those types of decisions that start to happen very, very early in maturity. When we start to hear things around EDI and we start to hear things around APIs and JSON and being able to support these things that happen in an automated fashion, that's really companies saying, well, the difference between me and my competitors is that I can process twice the amount of orders in half the amount of time because I'm doing things digitally. I can now offer, hey, you don't have to call, you don't have to email. Let's start doing business using EDI and X12. And I can start to say things like, I see the process, I see what's happening, and so I can give real-time visibility of the entire process, the operational process, and that becomes a differentiation. At some point, you start to say, well, I need to grow. And I can't just grow with people who can do EDI. I need to introduce portal technology. I need to introduce web forms. I need to do things like start to do business at an API or more programmatic real-time level. I need to start to get operational efficiency. I'm going to start to really streamline exception management, issue identification and resolution. I'm going to throw people at this idea of having incredible customer experience because that's going to get me more customers, more customers, more customers. And we've seen this, by the way, right? We especially see this in the software business where companies are going for growth and they throw a lot of sales, a lot of marketing, a lot of brand things into the mix. And then at some point, everyone stops and says, we're doing really good, but we've got to be profitable. We've got to automate more. We've got to put the right resources there. You know what? Instead of having all of these different systems, can we have these systems connected for convergence? In other words, as I work with an order and I work with inventory and that becomes a load and then that becomes an invoice, right? All that is, it's the same thing. It's representing the same thing that I'm buying. It's an order. It's an inventory movement. Then it's being put on a truck and it's a load, and then it becomes an invoice. That's all the same thing. We just call them different things at different stages in that life cycle. But I need that one control number for that order to be consistent all the way through, so I can do three-way matching. I can start to improve my days outstanding, my invoicing, all of those things. But I'm also starting to work with other vendors for real-time visibility, for credit checking, for carrier management, but I'm also doing it for spreading out inventory and 3PLs and all the rest of those things. And finally, when I get that stuff, then we get into this idea of how can I 25x my business? I'm doing everything well. I'm profitable. I've got growth. I'm still differentiated in this market I've chose to play in. How can I achieve scale? I want to go acquire 3 more lines of businesses or 3 more companies, but I don't want to lose the profitability, so I'm going to start to create centers of excellence for integration. I'm going to start to centralize my ERP. I'm going to start to really work with one team and work with a model so that I can continue to have profitability and efficiency, common architectures. So this is the growth that we see many companies go through. I'm in a market, I'm different, I've got growth in a market, I'm starting to get profitability, and then I get scale. And so what's really interesting is as we look across companies that have grown with, certainly have grown with Clio, but we look at companies, how they've grown just in a very generic sense, what starts to happen is early in the growth stage, in the presence and differentiation, companies tend to buy just single point solutions. I'm going to solve this Shopify to ERP problem, and I'm going to solve it with a piece of lightweight technology. Then as they start to move into more of the growth and it becomes an issue of volume and bandwidth, no, I need more of a dedicated solution. I need not just to do that. I got to do a whole bunch of other things, and I got to do it at scale. And then finally, as you move to profitability and scale, you realize that you need very deep and detailed control of the process. And so you move to a platform. And we see it over and over again. We see companies go through these procurement cycles where they're spending very little money, but on a very tiny solution, on a slightly bigger solution, a suite of products, finally moving into a platform. And there's an argument to be said that if a platform presents itself as letting you just consume a small function, or letting you just consume a set of capabilities with great volume, and then letting you have all of this control, those are the types of solutions that dominate in the market. So hopefully all of this is clear. I want to give you one caveat that we saw that exist. If you sell things, so manufacturers that rely on raw materials, that rely on having to buy things in order to build things, which is quite frankly most manufacturers, or even from a logistics standpoint, if you're an asset-based carrier, which means that you have a truck, you have a physical cost, what we've seen in terms of this evolution is that profitability and growth become reversed. So you get presence, differentiation, profitability, right? Because if it costs me $1 to buy, there's no way I can sell it for less than $1. So I always have to be profitable. Then I get to growth, then I get to scale. And one of the reason why I really want to call this out and make sure that you understand it is because it is a different strategy moving from presence, differentiation into profitability and then into growth and then into scale than it is when you reverse and you're moving from differentiation to growth to profitability and the scale. It is a different set of leadership. It's a different set of processes. It's a different set of technologies, right? And you're going to be looking at things in a very, very different way. So that's the beauty of this maturity model, right? This presence, differentiation, growth, profitability, or profitability and growth, depending, and scale. So there's a couple of things that you need to know. One, every company goes through this. And we've tried to just come up with examples, and we just couldn't find anything. And as we've had these conversations across our ecosystem, across the supply chain, with customers and prospects, but people who don't know who we are, where we introduce this model, it remains consistent that this is the evolution that companies go through. But the other piece is that the speed in which companies go through this model is solely dictated on economic conditions. Let me say that again. The speed in which a company will go through these stages are based on economic and industry conditions. And so what that means is post-COVID, immediately post-COVID, for logistics, for instance, we saw companies in mid-2020 come into existence, decide they saw the opportunity for fulfillment, and we watched companies rapidly get through profitability and into scale in the time distance between 2020 and 2022, first quarter of 2022. But in that same amount of time, coming into second quarter of 2022 to where we are today, because the freight industry has kind of tanked a bit, companies that came into the market then were moving very, very slowly. And that was incredibly interesting, which is why I present the trends of what's happening in the industry to say that manufacturers have moved very, very quickly over the last few years, but expect that evolution to slow down. And we believe that over the next year, manufacturers that are in differentiation mode or in growth mode are going to have to wait a little bit longer to get to that profitability, or it may take a little while longer and a lot more work to get to that profitability and ultimately get to that scale. And conversely, logistics companies that may have been stuck in just trying to show differentiation are going to see that rise in customers, are going to start to experience the opportunity for profitability and the opportunity for scale. So, a few things here. This model, all companies go through it. The speed in which they go through it is dictated by the economy, the industry, right? And what's happening. That's the speed. And how they buy technology is going to change in terms of the strategy that they use. Am I just looking for a solution? Am I looking for a suite of capabilities? Or am I looking for something that gives me the level of control for me to be profitable? So that's our model that we've seen. Can't wait to hear how many of you get the opportunity to use this on your business to predict where you are going to to be able to look at the industry and look at the trends to predict when you will be there. And if you're a vendor like we are, the opportunity to listen to what your prospects are asking to help determine where they are creates more compelling, more detailed, more focused transactions that happen in the industry. It is a great time to be in supply chain. All of the disruptions that we see are nothing but opportunities. Opportunities to be agile, opportunities to have amazing customer experiences at volume, and an amazing opportunity for investment and for people to make the kinds of money that they're looking at making. So looking forward to hearing how so many of you use that model. And with that, I'm going to throw it back over to Bob for conversations and questions. Bob?
My brain is spinning, Frank. I'm trying to process that incredible model that you just presented to us. That is so compelling and insightful about what companies are going through today. Really want to drill down a little more, though, into what you're saying. I want to have the privilege here of asking you some questions. At the same time, we're also bringing the audience in. So audience, as we're having this discussion, continue, please, to submit your questions by clicking on that Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, and we will hammer Frank with as many questions as we can get in the time we have allotted. Let me start. You had said something about you couldn't find examples. I'm wondering, though, are there any examples that stick in your head of manufacturers who are good examples, whose growth actually embodies the maturity curve that you shared with us today?
Yeah, absolutely, and we see them. Companies like Goya, I think, are a perfect example, right? So when you think about Goya, you think about just from a food, going to a grocery store and seeing just a plethora of products.
Mhm.
What you understand is that has Goya moved from being in the market, from being differentiated in the market, from then moving on to profitability, right? A manufacturer, they needed to be profitable. The things that they started to put in place to achieve that profitability, not just ERP and warehouses, but whole transportation networks to get beans from Honduras or plantains from the Dominican Republic or all of those things. When you look at the fulfillment and logistics network of a company like Goya, it is absolutely amazing. And then to watch them then use that to achieve growth and be in more supermarkets and be in more places has just been amazing. So as they start their journey in true scale, it is very interesting to see. Companies like Duraflame, which is we see them, I live in Florida, so I may see them once a year when I start the fireplace because it gets cold in Florida, Bob.
No, really?
Companies like Doorflame, where you see them just kind of go from this model of once a year and you have to go to a Walmart to get them to really being just anywhere that you can be. And then Doorflame, in a clever way, being able to leverage the marketplaces of their customers to give guidance to the end user, the consumer, for them
Mhm.
to go find where they can get Doorflame products has been absolutely amazing. Again, highly differentiated, figured out how to become profitable, and really now extending that growth, which is great while maintaining profitability. Really
Yeah.
interesting to see how they continue to do that growth. And there's just scores of them, from distributors like Kehi to logistics companies like Nolan and Keller and Arrive Logistics and Universal and ODFL. I just love to see it. And what's interesting, Bob, is that it's not bad or good where you are. It just gives you a sense of where you're coming from and where you could be going and the types of things you should be asking.
Interesting you should mention Duraflame or any other companies you mentioned that have been around for many, many years. And I'm wondering their experience versus, let's say you're a startup today. I'm wondering if you have an advantage on not being burdened by legacy technologies, that you can avail yourself from the get-go of the latest and greatest, as opposed to a company like Duraflame that may have to shed old systems in order to acquire the new ones that make them compete in today's environment. What's the dynamic there?
What's interesting is, we're always a fan and we as consumers, as IT technologists, of all the new stuff,
Sure.
AI
The
and
shiny
machine
stuff.
learning, and all the, and we can go back and blockchain and web services and Corba and all that stuff. We're always big fans of that. But, I told a friend recently that was building a house and they wanted everything new in the house.
Mhm.
And we actually pulled up some plans and we found that the city infrastructure, water and sewer, was still old ceramic pipes, right? That was
Mhm.
moving all of this stuff. So no matter how modern that house was, it was still being built. And right, and water and sewage, absolutely critical, right? And even the telephone pole that sits on the corner, all of that stuff is older infrastructure that has become so ubiquitous and is so good, has a utility. Why not use it? You would never start to replumb. You would just connect to existing systems. So technologies such as EDI are not old and stodgy. It
Mhm.
is the utility and the infrastructure. You're already talking to customers. And so, can I use that infrastructure? Can I use those pipes to deliver and consume new and interesting technologies and capability, real time types of integrations, real time types of visibility? Can I run those things through that same pipe that I've built and used for 30 years, like EDI? So it's kind of a renaissance for EDI, not in the sense of we're going to use EDI X12 850 purchase orders, but
Mhm.
we're going to use those pipes to push through API, JSON, and XML, and some of those things. So
Yeah.
it's really fascinating that we're starting to look at legacy technologies as actually being utilities that are there, and we don't have to recreate the wheel. And that is what's so interesting about getting into business and being in that presence in that differentiated stage,
Yeah.
today in 2024.
Well, you seem to be saying that the growing complexity of the tech stack is an inevitable byproduct of maturity.
Mhm.
That being the case, are there single vendors out there who can take you through the entire journey, through the phases of function, solution, and platform centric? Or do you normally start with a point solution vendor and then move over to an enterprise vendor when you need more sophistication?
So I would love to say that everybody in 2024 gets it and they're going to buy what they need to help them get to where they're going to get to. But
Mhm.
again, the model doesn't validate that in terms of it is not practical for a company that's coming in to an organization to buy a full platform that can do everything, but makes it very difficult. The expense, the resources, and all those things. So you tend to become very tactical. But
Hmm.
the idea of technology vendors that let you feel as if you're consuming just the function, and then let you consume maybe a set of processes, and then let you consume all the governance and control,
Mm.
that's what becomes interesting. And we're seeing that, Bob, happen from integration. And the problem is this: you can go to a mega vendor, an Oracle, an SAP, a Microsoft, and they're going to be very, very good at what you do. But you can't control who buys from you. And what happens is that customer is always king. They'll throw you a wrench and say, oh, by the way, I need this in that format. And so now you've got to get integration into the mix.
Sure.
Or I'm going to tell you, pre-COVID, while there was always things for status and visibility of deliveries, there was always these technologies. It is now something like a $4 billion a year market of real-time transportation visibility platforms that are really focused on shippers and manufacturers, helping them give better customer experiences that all of a sudden everybody's got to plug into. Again, an integration problem. And as I'm sure we'll talk about in future webinars, this idea of AI. AI is only going to be as good as the data you're going to give it. And the
Mm.
data that is specific to your supply chain and your ecosystem is going to come from places outside of your environment. It needs to, in order to be useful. So now you have to start to ask the question, in order to get a language model that is useful for me to do generative AI, how much of my ecosystem do I need to connect to? How much data do I need to give? All of these things, Bob, point back to an integration pattern. And
Hmm.
so this idea of integration platforms becomes a key enabler for things like AI, but things like EDI as well, and everything in between. So yes, the mega vendors can do it until someone comes up with an idea that provides value for the customer experience, and then you got to plug something in. And the moment you have to plug something in, you're going to turn to the integration stack.
Sure. What you're saying about AI ties in very nicely with this audience question. And that is simply, where are you seeing AI having the biggest impact so far and in the future in this whole scale of functionality and the like?
Uh, we see AI as being incredibly useful, and it's being used really at the front of customer experience. So things like, how do I? Or this is an issue I'm having, how could
Hmm.
it be solved? And throwing that at AI. Unfortunately, we're just not in a position, right, in our world today that the the data that we need again to have informed outputs, it's just not there. Let me give you a perfect example, Bob. We um we have my mom called me, right? And my mom, I'm not gonna say how old she is because she may watch this, probably not, but if she does, she'll be mad, right? But
Hmm.
she's up there, and she says to me, she says in her New York accent, she goes, Frankie, let me tell you something. I'm so afraid about this AI and what they're saying on TV. And I said, Mom, you don't even use Siri. You don't use Alexa. You tell her to turn off and on the lights. That's the only thing she knows about you, right? And it's the same thing in organizations. So we buy this technology, we'll put it in, but we have to feed it the data that is going to be relevant to get the things that we want. And
Hmm.
when it comes to supply chain, that means looking at all of those purchase orders. That means looking at all of those inventory moves and advice that you have. That means looking at all of the invoices and looking at all of the errors across the spectrum. We're just not there yet. And we can get there by making these connections, but the connections have to be made in a very thoughtful, well architected, with a great amount of strategy. So we're still a ways off. It's really good at doing very, very domain specific things today,
Hmm.
lots of help desks and experience related matters. But to really give insight in saying that, hey, you should be doing this, and if you do this, this is the benefit. We need to be able to feed it the data, which is an integration
You're
issue.
talking about prescriptive AI, making the
Exactly.
decisions for you, or at least telling you what decision to make, and then the human being goes ahead and makes that decision. But
Right.
but in the future,
Alerting you,
you
I'm sorry, Bob, alerting you to
go
a
on.
problem that you don't even know that you have
Right.
because you can't fathom it, right?
But you think we'll get there, do you, Frank?
I think we will get there. I mean, we will get there when and all of the disruption that we see in the market that's happening today, we'll get there because that disruption, steel sharpens steel, it
Hmm.
makes us more agile, right?
Right.
Because anything could happen. We've got elections here in the US, we've got a hurricane that's barreling through, we've got geopolitics happening all around the world, we've got labor issues, right? We've got economies in disarray, we've got stimulus in China, we've got rate reductions in the United States. All of these things impact the supply chain. And so the only thing that is certain is the disruption and uncertainty. And as we start to build our networks and our supply chains to handle those bumps in the night, where we can press a button and change partners fairly quickly without too much disruption because we've pre-negotiated so many things, that's when we'll start to get the stability. And when people realize they want to do more and more of that, that's when the connections will happen, and boom, AI then becomes the solution to a problem that is well defined.
Frank, you've been talking about all along about what companies are going to do, how they're going to move from one phaser to another, how they're going to acquire all this technology. But as we all know, companies are made up of people.
Yes.
Who within the manufacturing organization should be involved in this decision making when it comes to digital transformation, architectural changes? I mean, you got the CSCO now, you got the CTO, you got the CIO, you got the CFO, and the CEO. Who is making the decisions?
Bob, 70% of the time, the decisions come from the C level, from the bosses.
Hmm.
And what happens, according to Gardner Research, what happens is that by the time the project becomes in the idealization or the problem solving piece where we decide to buy something, the people who have to use the technology, the developers, the operators, all of those folks don't have time to go back in and say this was not a good decision or this is a problem that could have been solved, and that leads to a tremendous amount of resistance, that leads to a tremendous amount of project failures. The better way to take advantage is when the problem is realized by C level and the problem gets seen from a revenue, and we're not as profitable, our EBITDA is not where it needs to be, those types of things,
Mm.
then the opportunity to involve the operators, the developers, in trying to figure out what is the root cause of that, and is there a way, and what are the best practices to solve that, is really where you need to be. And so going back into your organization, talking to your developers, talking to your analysts, talking to your architects, but most importantly, talking to your sellers, talking to your buyers, talking to the people who have to pick up the phone and say, this is where your order is, and finding out where they believe the ball is being dropped and what you can do. What companies are going to find is that the solutions are not as hard as you think that they are, right? And the expertise lives there. And that is going to make more successful transformations of business, right? It is going to really give credibility throughout the organization. And we see the best organizations that plow through this evolution really looking at their people and involving their people at all levels in that decision making of how to buy technology and what technologies to buy.
Yeah. Now, as I wonder if the need for certain types of technology changes in accordance with changing channel trends. For instance, e-commerce sales exploded during the pandemic. A lot of businesses went direct to consumer rather than compete on the retailer's shelf. Is that still happening? Is e-commerce still a big trend? Is that still driving final decisions on tech acquisition? If so, how long is that going to continue?
I think, again, and I look at a lot of surveys to see what people are saying, and I talk to a lot of folks. Um, the part about COVID and driving e commerce is absolutely true, and we saw that. The reality is, though, Bob, the pain started happening in fulfillment because so much of the world was focused on staying at home and what you could buy. We really, no one was thinking about how does it get fulfilled, right? And at the end of the day, some woman in a truck has to drive down some street and look and unload this,
Mhm.
right? So it comes back down to the people. Nothing has changed. So e-commerce is still hot, right? It wasn't like people said, "Oh, everybody's coming back outside again. Let's stop." E-commerce is still hot and is still being used. But the biggest issue in a recent survey that manufacturers are having, the thing that they're most terrified of, are delivery delays,
Mm.
are delays in fulfillment, right? They're not as terrified as the customer experience. They're not as terrified of the ordering process, right? We've got that. We've understood that. It is the reality that every holiday season, right, that we move further and further from the pandemic, there is more e-commerce, more e-commerce. That means there's more fulfillment, more fulfillment, more fulfillment.
Mhm.
And when you look at logistics and you look at fulfillment as part of the manufacturing process, the order to cash process, when you look at that, it is inherently a business model that is one half automation and one half people. And when
Yeah.
we don't have enough people, that's when we have the problem. So the number one problem around this holiday season that manufacturers are seeing, in fact, is the worry about fulfillment, is the worry about delays, and what does that mean? And that
Yeah.
is huge, especially given the monetary impact that this time of the year has on the economy.
And indeed, we're hearing reports now, as we do every year, about company A or company B is hiring X number of thousands of more workers for the peak season. And it makes you think, well, wait a minute, I thought automation was going to take care of all that. We don't have self-driving trucks that much yet or anything of that kind. So we're not there yet. Okay, so you mentioned EDI. You kind of put EDI at one end of the scale and you put AI at the other end, and that's like, decades of difference there. But you also seem to be suggesting that EDI is still here to stay, at least for a while. With the recent rise of APIs, though, automated programming interfaces, and the flexibility that they bring to the table, do you see a world where we finally move away from EDI entirely?
I don't. And what I see is that instead of one fish getting bigger than another fish, I just think the pond is expanding into a lake.
Hmm.
And so we've got two different fish that are growing, and they may be growing at two different rates, but they are still incredibly important to the ecosystem of that environment. And the same thing in supply chain. Bob, there is no better way to represent a purchase order or a load tender. There just isn't, in a way. And remember, when we talk about EDI, we're not just talking about a transformation that says change this into that. We're talking about a system of redundancies, a system of non-repudiation, a system of guaranteed delivery. I
Mhm.
like to call it small EDI. A whole bunch of people talk about, yeah, we can do X12 conversion, and big EDI. All of the business processes and the governance that goes into the exchange of a purchase order. Hey, I sent you a purchase order. Did you get it? Yeah, I got it. I sent you an acknowledgement. Did you get it? Yeah, I got it. Great. I got that. You got my acknowledgement, right?
Mhm.
Guaranteed delivery.
Those are classic
That's
EDI formats. Yeah.
yeah, that's the process. And so this idea of big EDI, it becomes this idea of process governance, and it gives us the infrastructure to move things between two entities. APIs enhance that, and it enhances that for things that are important to know real time: status updates,
Mhm.
acknowledgments, all of those types of things. And so in the best worlds, this idea of EDI and APIs and even managed file transfer to movement of files really work closely and tightly together. And in fact, Bob, if you look at the process, in order to cash process, you will find these sub processes that make up that order to cash process. This McKinsey idea of a perfect order is going to be reliant on some part of APIs, some part of managed file transfer, and some part of EDI. So
Mm.
there's a coexistence that if companies can gravitate to, those are the companies that are going to win.
So the batch processing nature of EDI does not become a problem in terms of searching for real-time messaging because you've got those other technologies accompanying at the same time. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, because after all, boy, I can buy something right now and I get the notification on my phone that I bought it. I can look at my bank account and it's been, there's a debit, there's a pending charge. But what do we all see at every single financial institution on every lap if we try to make a deposit or whatever? Deposits after 11 p.m. will be counted towards the next day. And
Right.
what that means is that even the biggest, the brightest, the most technical financial institutions in the world still rely on a high degree of batch processing to make those debits and those credits, the real debits and the credits, not the pending, not the cached stuff, not the temporary tables and those things.
Yeah.
The real movement of money in this world is still heavily reliant on batch processing and good old fashioned managed file transfer.
I love to hear you say that because this image of money just zipping around the world in, milliseconds may be true at a certain level, but certainly not at the level that we're talking about here, the execution level, logistics and
Absolutely.
delivery. Okay, I got an audience question, another one about AI, especially since you were talking about how important it is in terms of managing the input into an AI system in order to get the proper output. This questioner is asking if AI can itself help with the input in terms of data cleansing. Can it play a role there, or will it play a role there?
I think it will, right? I think it will in terms of how do I massage the data? So if I get data from partner A, right, and then data from partner B, well, that's two different data sets, two different languages. And so I have to massage it to kind of bubble up the things that are going to be useful. And I think that business intelligence and a lot of the machine learning that we've been doing from the time of OLAP cubes to everything that we're doing now, it is going to play a role.
Mm-hmm.
The problem again that I think is a good old fashioned hammer, screwdriver, nail, and screw. What integration does is the actual physical connection to that partner across domains, across firewalls, across inhospitable internet where everybody is trying to get into that feed to capture some information. That governance, that security is still an integration issue. So AI is going to help us massage BI and all the rest of these tools that we've had for a while are going to help us get the data into the right format. Yes, absolutely. But if I'm not connected, if I can't get into the door, and if I can't get into the door in a secure, consistent, predictable way, having all the technology is not useful. It still is a solution to a problem we just haven't brought quite into focus.
Wow. Okay. Well, unfortunately, I'm the bearer of bad news here, and that is that we were just about out of time because this is an absolutely fascinating conversation. I wish it could go on for hours, Frank, and I hope we can have another conversation going forward that digs even deeper into this. But in the meantime, we just have time for one final question. I'm going to hit you with it right now. What further supply chain disruption do you predict within the space? And how does a manufacturer working toward profitability, including a more cohesive integration strategy, insulate itself from disruption and also make itself more elastic?
So Bob, like I was saying, disruption is the new normal.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to get this idea of supply chain disruption as if it's different than the normal. No, we've been living in a highly disruptive environment for the past, since globalization is a thing, right? The past 50, 60 years as happened. So disruption is always going to be there. What you want to do is start to create agile environments. And agile environments require levels of automation and levels of governance and control. But the best environments have that automation, but can hand off to humans. So don't go and fire all the humans. No, they're going to be incredibly important because more and more your customers are going to want to talk to a real person, but they're going to require that real person to have the right data, high quality data, and have it in a timely, fast, and efficient way.
Mm-hmm.
And so this automation and this manual processes have got to come together in a well-governed way to ensure customer experience. And that is how every single company is going to weather this new normal, is going to have that agility and resiliency that they're going to need to just be able to do business for the future, because this is the world that we're living in.
We have talked so much over the last few months about supply chain digitization. I think for the first time, Frank, thanks to you, I'm kind of understanding what that actually means and what it actually entails and how companies going forward need to apply it along different parts of their journey toward maturity. Frank, Kenny, thank you once again for that fantastic presentation, a real eye-opener. And audience, thank you also for your attendance and your great questions. Really do appreciate that. I do want to offer our audience a little bonus here, a case study collection, multiple case studies from Clio about manufacturers who rely on Clio to scale their organization, as we were talking about, and continue growth on the maturity curve. You can scan that QR code right now, or if you don't have time to do it in the final few seconds we have here, don't worry about it. This information, this screen, will be sent to all attendees of this presentation. So once again, Frank, Kenny, it's been really a pleasure hearing you speak. And audience, thank you once again. Everybody, stay well and take care and have a great day.
Thank you, Bobby. Take care.